Good evening, everyone. Just to let you know, we are still waiting for two of the panelists. They are stuck in traffic. They are on the way, should be here any minute, but that's what the delay is, why we're not starting right at 7. Thank you. Okay, good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Martin Modar. I'm a co-director of the Institute of Spirituality and Social Justice here at Xavier University, which includes our graduate program in theology. On behalf of the Institute and together with the Brueggemann Center for Dialogue, Bellarmine Chapel, and St. Xavier Church, it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening at this fifth event in the series titled Vatican II at 60. We have prepared the series because we want to bring attention to the Council as a gift to the Church, a gift whose reception is still in process. The goal of this series is not simply to rehash the decades-long debates regarding the Council or even to simply memorialize a generational event, but rather to inquire into the Council's legacy for us today and to reflect where we are in the reception of the Council. Today we are doing something different than the last 4 times. Instead of a lecture, we are having a panel discussion on the topic of a dialogue among religions. Vatican II reshaped the relations between Catholics and other religions with its declaration that we typically refer to with the Latin title Nostra Aetate, which means in our time. Breaking with the past, the Council affirmed that there is much in other religions that is true and holy, and asked Catholics to enter into dialogue with members of other religions. How this call has been received in the last 60 years is our topic this evening. I will now hand things over to Dr. John O'Keefe, who is the director of the Brueggemann Center for Dialogue at Xavier University. He will moderate the discussion. Thank you. John.
Thanks, Martin. Again, my name is John O'Keefe. I'm the director of the Brueggemann Center for Dialogue here at Xavier. I'm also a theologian. I spent 31 years at Creighton University teaching theology, and from time to time I would teach Vatican II documents, but my main training is ancient Christianity. But I'm really delighted to be here tonight and to have our wonderful panelists who are going to be each speaking individually, and then we'll be having I think a fairly interesting conversation. But what I thought might be helpful as a way to frame the conversation this evening is to talk just a little bit about the document Nostra Aetate. And in case many of you probably know this, but all Vatican conciliar documents are always named after the first 2 words of the text. So Nostra Aetate in Latin are the first 2 words of the document, which in our time. It doesn't really say a whole lot about what the document is about. The document is about the Catholic tradition opening itself up to other religions. And for those of you born in this century and alive in this age of the world, this may not seem to be very interesting or even revolutionary, but at the time that this happened, this was a very, very, very big deal. So let me just say a few things. Nostra Aetate was promulgated on October 28th, 1965, so just over 60 years ago. So 2 days ago would have been the 60th anniversary, in the last session of the Council. It's the shortest text in the collected documents of Vatican II. Most of these, like the dogmatic constitution on the Church, these things are like pretty long. And if you're a student and having been assigned to read them, you know they're pretty long. This text is 5 pages long. It is super short. For those of you who are not old, before the Second Vatican, and by the way, when this document came out, I was 7. So, and I wasn't practicing, my family didn't raise me Catholic, so I have no memory of this. But before the Second Vatican Council, I am told that non-Catholics were called by the Catholic Church simply as, they're simply called heretics. Not fellow Christians, but heretics. And practitioners of other religions were dismissed as heathens. The last thing you would ever want to do if you were a serious Catholic in 1965 was marry a Protestant. And this may seem crazy, hard to imagine, but the tensions were really, really very large. And it seems like now we've transferred a lot of that kind of animosity to our political tensions. But before Vatican II or during Vatican II, there was really very strained relationships between the Christian churches, the Protestant and Catholic traditions. But Vatican II did so many things to open that up. And with this document, Nostra Aetate, it invites Catholics everywhere into dialogue, both with, in this document specifically with non-Christians, but in other documents of Vatican II with other Christians. And in the theological field, we talk about dialogue across Christian denominations as ecumenical dialogue, and dialogue across religious traditions as interfaith dialogue. So Vatican II and Nostra Aetate was especially, well, with this particular text, the main emphasis when it was conceived was to try to do something to heal the horrible legacy the Catholic tradition had with relationship to Judaism. And there were places in the Catholic liturgy, especially on Good Friday, which claimed that the Jews were involved in killing God, long history of anti-Semitism, and there was a lot of pressure on the council fathers and bishops to make some kind of statement to heal those wounds. And there was open conversations and important conversations going on between Vatican leaders and Jewish leaders that were beginning to put this document into some kind of real form that might actually have a chance of passing and being adopted by the council. For many people, Nostra Aetate may seem like a very small step in the area of interfaith dialogue because it really does, at the end of the day, still claim that the fullness of truth lies within the Catholic Church. But at the same time, for the first time really in Catholic history, it says there is truth in other religions that we can learn from. I don't know if any of you remember the old phrase, extra ecclesiam nullis salus, no salvation outside the church, which was official Catholic teaching. The Vatican II and Nostra Aetate really begins to interrupt that and to say, what can we learn about God from our Muslim brothers and sisters? What can we learn about God from our Buddhist brothers and sisters? What can we learn about God from people who have experiences of God in different traditions all over the world? So it really is a major watershed moment in Catholic approach to other religious traditions. One thing I found out when I was preparing for my comments this evening was there was a lot of political pressure on the bishops of the council and the Pope not to publish this document. Internally, conservative Catholics felt like it gave up too much, and there were Christians in the Middle East who were under pressure from Middle Eastern bishops not to publish it because they thought it was too Zionist. So it's amazing in some ways that it got published at all. But it did. And I think, as we will find out, this is it has had a very dramatic impact on the way Catholic Christians interact with other religious traditions around the world. So I'm really excited about the conversation we're about to have. And the format that we're adopting is each of our panelists will speak for about 10 or 13 minutes, depending. So we had one panelist who was unable to join us tonight, so we have a little bit more leeway. And they're going to talk about their experience of this document and the reception of this document and what it means from their point of view as members of a different religious tradition. And then I will ask them some questions, and then we'll have plenty of time for folks in the audience to ask questions as well. And so let me just take a moment to introduce our panelists. As I mentioned, Aruni Marapane was not able to join us. She was going to be representing the Buddhist community in Cincinnati. But tonight we do have with us Rabbi Gary Zola, who is Executive Director Emeritus of the Jacob Radner Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives, and the Edward M. Ackerman Family Distinguished Professor Emeritus of the American Jewish Experience and Reformed Jewish History at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. In addition to his academic work at HEC, he has been involved in interfaith and interracial work locally and nationally for the past 4 decades. His relationship with Xavier goes back to 1982, and he says he met Father Brueggemann, after whom the Brueggemann Center is named, and had the privilege of playing racquetball with him. So, Rabbi Zola, welcome. Next we have Dr. Samina Sohail, who is vice chair of the Islamic Center of Greater Cincinnati, a community leader who has been involved with education, outreach, and interfaith dialogue for the past decade. Dr. Sohail is a family physician who has practiced in Cincinnati for 2 decades. And finally, we have Ruben Habito, who's a Filipino-born Zen teacher and Christian theologian whose work focuses on the dialogue and integration between Zen Buddhism and Christianity. He's a key figure in interreligious spirituality, particularly in exploring how contemplative practice can deepen Christian faith. So welcome.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much. So, in contrast to Dr. O'Keefe, my friend, I'm not a theologian. I'm a historian, and so I'm going to talk a little historically. And I also remember very much personally the promulgation of Nostra Aetate, because it was a very significant event in the American Jewish community. It was a dramatic event, and I think that many Jews, myself included, would say that to understand why it was such a dramatic and important event is to think about the context, the historical context. I would teach that, in a sense, Nostra Aetate is part of the post-Holocaust era, and that it really is part of an evolving response to the desire for people to try to understand what happened in the mid-20th century, that such a calamity could befall humanity. And I think that in the opening paragraph of Nostra Aetate, you see this, because the text itself says, in our time, Nostra Aetate, when day by day mankind is being drawn closer together and the ties between different peoples are becoming stronger, the church examines more closely her relationship with non-Christians. Now, just a quick mention, historically, I personally again see the appearance of Nostra Aetate as in a string of statements that occurred after the Holocaust. Beginning really in 1945, I recently served as an advisor on a doctorate where one of my students really studied the chronological development of Christian statements about Jews following World War II. So the student begins with the 1945 Stuttgart Declaration of Guilt, which is fundamentally comes from the German Protestant Church. And then the next such important statement were the 10 points of Seelisberg, which was created in Switzerland with both Christian leaders across the board and some Jewish participants. That is a very important, this 1947, very important statement, because it really, in a sense, becomes the basis for Jewish-Christian dialogue. And then, of course, the passing of Pope Pius XII in 1958 really, in a sense, opens up an entirely new chapter in the church with an entirely different pope, with a completely different attitude. As everybody, I think, knows, Pope Pius lived through World War II, and suddenly we have Pope John the 23rd, who I actually remember as a youngster. This statement was absolutely revolutionary for the Jews, and it is a document that, without question, transformed the relationship of the church with Judaism, with the Jewish people. My teachers used to remind me, and I would like to point out, that I think most in this audience, if you're Cincinnatians, know that if I speak about the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, where I taught for 45 years, I have to follow it with of blessed memory, because the wisdom of our New York co-religionists don't necessarily value the middle of the country the way we did. But I was required as a rabbinic student to take 2 semesters in Christian studies. That's not done anymore. So I actually was taught a little bit about Nostra Aetate, and my teacher was wanted to stress always that we shouldn't look at Nostra Aetate on its own, by itself, but with following up documents that were created in 1974 and then again in 1985. 74 was the development of a document called Guidelines, which expatiated on Nostra Aetate, and the same thing in 1985. I'm not going to go into it because of time, but all of this was, if you will, a widening of the scope. It made the Nostra Aetate much more capacious. One of my teachers said, to give you an idea of the dramatic impact that it had on American Jews around the world, was that the impact, my teacher said, the impact of Nostra Aetate could be compared to watching an ocean liner rotate 180 degrees. Now, from the Jews' point of view, this statement, one commentator put it this way: thanks to Nostra Aetate, we, meaning Jews and Catholics, have moved from persecution to partnership, from confrontation to cooperation, from diatribe to dialogue. And I think that that's fairly accurate. And if we get into it, I'm concerned about time, but if we get into it, I can delineate some of the shocking changes that have taken place from before Nostra Aetate. I'm talking in terms of the church's thinking about the Jewish people in comparison to the way it's viewed today. And that brings me to my final opening remark, and that is, thankfully, I see some younger folk here, and I'm hoping that the younger people don't know that long list of challenges and difficulties that existed before Nostra Aetate, because now 60 years have passed, much has occurred, and therefore maybe they might be sufferers of what is often called historical amnesia, meaning having not experienced the changes, they're not necessarily aware of what they were. And that is the point I'd like to conclude on, because we're here, in a sense, to mark the 60th anniversary, and I'm sorry to say, but there may be some people here who can identify, it seems like just yesterday that we were marking the 50th. And I remember that. And one of the complaints during the 50th was that there's a great deal of lack of understanding, lack of appreciation, lack of historical consciousness regarding Nostra Aetate. And this may be fascinating to you with regard to this point, because in 2015, when we celebrated or marked the 50th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, one of my rabbinical students did a master's thesis and explored within largely the Jewish community, but not exclusively, whether or not Nostra Aetate had faded in terms of its importance, whether its significance, its validity was, people were cognizant of it. And he did a statistical, sociological study with something like several hundreds of questionnaires, which I'm not going to argue is perfection, but experience of one confirms what he discovered in 2015, which was that 60% of the respondents felt that Nostra Aetate was not so important, not so significant, not really all that relevant to these people today. And that provoked the comment that at the 50th that needs to be addressed, because it is important. Well, here we are already with the blink of an eye, 1 decade later, and my final comment is that I think we haven't probably made too much progress in that realm. And so I'd like to conclude by suggesting 3 areas that we could consider for making or renewing, if indeed this rabbinic student who's now a rabbi, if what he discovered has merit, then what we might do to bring some renewal to this. So the first is to acknowledge that we have mastered dialogue. We've done dialogue now for 60 years, and that but this dialogue has largely, not exclusively, but largely been between leaders, religious leaders, and pillars of both communities, and that dialogue probably we could make a progress in terms of renewing its significance, the great significance of this change, through finding a way to bring community, or if you will, lay people together in some kind of exchange. And the best way for me that I'd suggest is my second point, which is collaboration. This I learned from Dr. O'Keefe's predecessor, Dr. Buchanan, who was the founding director of the Brueggemann Center. And Dr. Buchanan always used to say, the time for dialogue is a different generation. Now is a time for what he called collaboration, meaning the communities really have to work together and get to know one another through mutual projects, mutual activities, hopefully centering on making the world a better place. And the final point is education. That is, to find in both communities a deliberate and an initiative to actually teach about this topic and interfaith relations. I'm a little down in the dumps about that at my own community because, as I told you, the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, which had a curriculum which initiated such a requirement. And by the way, I'll just say that in a career now that's stretching more than 4 decades, my 2 courses in Christian studies were vital to my rabbinate. Vital, because it's impossible to live in a country like America where the majority of the citizens are Christians and know nothing about their religion. And I can tell you that most Jews know almost nothing about Christianity. And in this regard, Christians have a leg up on Jews because Judaism, or the Hebrew Bible, or if you will, the Old Testament, is a critical part of Christian religious tradition. So those religious texts are familiar to Christians, even if the theology is different. But Jews don't ever look at the New Testament. And so the ignorance of the Jewish community is very great. And now we're going, and this is why I said I'm so sad, is because now liberal rabbis who are being educated today, they will not have any exposure to that. And I think that's a loss. And in regard to education, I want to point out what others have taught me, and I think it's a valid point. I'd like to bring it to you, and that is that, often Catholics tend to be very interested in doctrinal matters and what we believe, what our catechism is, and so forth. And Jews by nature are very, very interested in history and like to look at Judaism through a cultural or historical lens. And therefore, I'd suggest that a great way to make use of this is that if we could begin to study together, to educate ourselves together on the scholarly understanding of the New Testament, the controversies that are embedded within the New Testament, to actually examine how it is that the New Testament was taught in a certain way for so many years, and what the implications of teaching it a different way are, how some scholars, both Christians and Jews, bring out the questions that are embedded within these texts. This might be a way in which academically, intellectually, both Jews and Catholics could find a common thread. While I'm talking about that, I think it should. I want to at least point out what Dr. O'Keefe pointed out, which is that Nostra Aetate also includes a whole paragraph about the Muslims and about Islam, and that these people too, says Nostra Aetate, are children of God and have much to teach us, and therefore not only should we be talking any more about dialogue, but we should be talking about trialogue, so that we're working together in that way. Now, the last thing, and with this I conclude. Have I lived within my time frame? Okay. All right. Okay. There's been plenty of criticism about Nostra Aetate. I remember this from when I was a child, that when it was first promulgated, there were certain Jews who said, well, this is very nice, but we don't need to be forgiven, And so it may not may not be perfection, but it certainly is, and no one would question it, has certainly brought forward a better understanding and a more kinder understanding between peoples. And the church's change that Dr. O'Keefe explained is very valid. So I will conclude with this point. You probably learned in sociology, in social studies, like I did in high school, that for 1,000 years ships couldn't go around the Cape of Storms, which is at the bottom point of Africa, because there was so much bad weather that no one wanted to try to get around the bottom of the South African point. And then finally, as I was taught as a kid, Vasco da Gama, the explorer, finally was able to navigate those shoals, and he goes around, and what does he discover? A very smooth sea leads to India. So my metaphor here is what happened is the name was changed from Cape of Storms to the Cape of Good Hope. So there's nobody who could question that the Nostra Aetate and what has happened as a result of it should say we've gone around the Cape, and instead of the storms, we should have some good hope for the future. So with that, I think I'll stop. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. That is a Muslim greeting which says, may peace of God be with you. I'm actually humbled to be sharing this stage with historians, scholars, theologians, none of which I am. I am a community leader and a family physician, and actually a lot of what I'm speaking about today I learned as I prepared, so again, I'm honored to be here. With this lens, I do know, as Dr. Zola talked about, it is a common hope that we share, that our faiths draw us closer in understanding, compassion, and service. So, as mentioned earlier, Nostra Aetate was a turning point in 1965 when they issued this short but revolutionary declaration. And for the first time in history, the church spoke publicly of Islam with esteem, and it declared, the church regards with esteem also the Muslims. They adore the one God, living and subsisting in himself, merciful and all-powerful, the creator of heavens and earth. It also recognized that Muslims revere Abraham, may peace be upon him, that they honor Jesus as a prophet, may peace be upon him, and they venerate Mary, may peace be upon her, as his virgin mother. It acknowledged the shared values between Christianity and Islam, such as prayer, fasting, and charity. And most importantly, it called upon Catholics and Muslims alike to forget the past and strive sincerely for mutual understanding. And from what I understand, this was truly transformative. It was a reversal of centuries of animosity, misunderstanding, and conflict, and began a new era of dialogue and respect. So after this document was issued, the church actually began walking a new path. Popes met Muslim leaders, Catholic universities opened centers for Islamic studies, and in 2001, Pope John Paul II entered a mosque in Damascus, the first pope in history to enter a mosque. Pope Francis continued to deepen these ties, signing the document on human fraternity with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar in 2019, calling all people of faith to peace, justice, and human dignity. So through these steps, the church moved from being a fortress to a bridge builder. 4 decades later, the Muslim world responded with a message of its own. In 2007, 138 Muslim scholars and leaders wrote A Common Word Between Us and You, and it was an open letter to Christian leaders around the world. Its title came from the Quran, chapter 3, verse 64, which says, "O people of the scripture, come to a common word between us and you, that we shall worship none but God." The letter emphasized our shared foundations, in particular, love of God and love of neighbor, the two greatest commandments in both faiths. It was not a theological argument, but a moral invitation to work together for justice and peace. The authors wrote, "Without peace and justice between these two communities, there can be no meaningful peace in the world." Christian scholars and institutions from Yale and Cambridge to the Vatican welcomed it, leading to ongoing dialogue and creation of the Catholic-Muslim Forum. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about my personal reflections of what this means to me. This shared foundation of love of God and neighbor predates even before I was born. My parents attended Catholic schools in Pakistan in the 50s and 60s. Founded by Jesuit and Franciscan missionaries, these schools welcomed all faiths and built generations of Pakistanis in character and service. To this day, over 90% of their students in these Christian Catholic schools are Muslim. It was never about conversion, but about compassion, discipline, and nation building, values that shaped my parents and later on me. Years later, when I attended a Jesuit medical school in St. Louis, I found deep resonance between Jesuit and Islamic spirituality. I still recall a cold February afternoon in St. Louis when our first-year medical school class held a multi-faith cadaver memorial service. I offered the Muslim prayer, honoring those who donated their bodies to science. And in that moment, I saw how both traditions teach reverence for life and gratitude for those who serve humanity even in death. Jesuit cura personalis, care for the whole person, mirrors the Islamic ideal of ihsan, excellence and compassion. And now, sending my 3 sons to a Jesuit high school has deepened this connection. Both faiths emphasize belief in God, pursuit of knowledge, moral integrity, and service to others. Jesuit ideals, ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God, and again, cura personalis, parallels Islam's call to live for God, seek ihsan, and serve humanity. In that environment, my sons have grown into confident Muslims, grounded in faith, guided by conscience, and ready to serve the world. One of the most tender bridges between our faith is our shared love for Mary, Maryam, peace be upon her. In Islam, she is honored as the purest of women. An entire chapter, Surah Maryam, bears her name. Both Christians and Muslims see in her a model of humility and surrender to God's will. 2 years ago, when I visited the Vatican and stood in St. Peter's Basilica surrounded by art devoted to Mary, I felt a sacred familiarity, as though our faiths were speaking the same languages of devotion. Mary gathers us and reminds us that holiness transcends creed and culture and is rooted in trust, mercy, and hope. Our era's popes have also spoken with moral clarity on human dignity and the sanctity of life. Pope Francis, moved by the suffering in Gaza, said, "This is cruelty, this is not war." He repeatedly called for a ceasefire, humanitarian aid access, and protection of civilians. Pope Leo has continued these calls for a ceasefire, respect for international borders and laws, and protection of civilians. So the message has been clear. Faith must defend the sanctity of life, the dignity of every human being, and must advocate for peace rooted in justice and compassion. So, as Dr. Zola said, dialogue we've mastered, but I do believe it's not enough. It needs to continue beyond the leaders, as he said, to more individuals from all of our faiths. Nostra Aetate opened the door. A common word extended the hand. Now it's time for Muslims, Christians, and all peoples of conscience and faith to walk through that door together. It means feeding the hungry. It means healing the sick. It means defending the displaced, and it means protecting our planet. As the Quran commands, cooperate in righteousness and piety, and do not cooperate in sin and aggression. And the Jesuit tradition reminds us that faith must do justice. Our shared call is to return to prayer into service and belief into compassion. It's been an honor to stand here. Both my own path, shaped by both Islamic and Catholic traditions, has taught me this. When we seek God sincerely, we often find each other. May we continue walking together in faith, justice, and compassion towards the one God who created us all. Thank you.
Thank you. I am really honored to be part of this panel tonight. And I thank Dr. O'Keefe for inviting me. I just happened to be here in Cincinnati this evening, so he said, why don't you come? And so here I am. And I am grateful to Rabbi Dr. Zola for his remarks, which were very moving for me. In many ways, I'll tell you later, but thank you so much. And Dr. Sohail, thank you so much for your words that really inspire me to be who I am as much as I can. One of the emeritus professors of Xavier University, Paul Knitter, is a good friend of mine. We met when he was still doing his research in Japan, when I was still there as a Jesuit missionary, and we became good friends since, and we've communicated. And as many of you may know, he wrote a book among his many books called Without Buddha, I Could Not Be Christian. Is that the accurate title? So I'd like to begin my statement tonight by saying that without Nostra Aetate, I could not be Catholic. I was born in the late 1940s. I'm almost 80 now, but I grew up in a devout Catholic family, pre-Vatican, and we would, of course, have our daily prayer, often with the rosary, with our whole family there. And then we would go to Mass in its format whereby there was a priest who was standing against a wall with his back to all of us, and with incense and all of the very moving kinds of Latin recitations. And I really love that. I would wake up on Sundays for the 5 o'clock Mass because I really wanted to experience that every time. So just the incense and then the Gregorian chant and the prayers to this God who is beyond anything we can ever imagine, that the priest was acknowledging there. And then came the Vatican Council, and there was as Dr. Zola said, a 180-degree change. The priest turned around and started facing the community. A very simple change of posture, gesture. But for me, that meant something very deep, namely that it told me about where God could be found. Not just somewhere up there in a transcendent way where the priest acknowledged that transcendence, but also the turnaround of the priest came home to me with a message that God is also in our midst. We need to find God in our midst. So that's one of the big changes that the Vatican Council gave for me as a Catholic, seeking earnestly to be a Catholic at that time. A second point that I also learned from what the Vatican Council achieved was also this transformation related to the first, that our ultimate destiny is, of course, beyond, namely in the afterlife, and that was my upbringing, that we're here on earth to be tested so that it'll be shown whether we're worthy of getting to our place in heaven. So it was always an afterlife kind of looking attitude that I was raised in. And then with the Vatican Council, the emphasis came to be that, no, God is right here in our midst, so live this life to the full, live in the light of God's grace, and there you will find your way to eternity in living fully this life. So that turnaround of the priest was very symbolic in that it also enabled us to be more aware that God is with us here on earth, not just in heaven where God is waiting for us if we behave well enough here, but that God is in our midst and that we are called to live in a way that God's love is reflected in our lives. So that's the second lesson that I learned from the Second Vatican Council. And the third lesson, of course, is the most important one that we're talking about today, Nostra Aetate. At that time, when I read the Nostra Aetate, I was already a Jesuit in the novitiate. And somehow I was so excited to read those few lines in the Nostra Aetate that said, the Catholic Church does not reject anything that is true and good and holy in other religions. So that for me was like a Magna Carta, a declaration of liberation, that God is found everywhere. Wherever there is truth and goodness and holiness, there is God. So that gave me the liberation to really explore beyond the narrow confines of the historical Roman Catholic Church and realize that God is beyond the walls of this church that I was raised in. And the background of that is, as I attended the masses that I did and loved in my youth, and loved the incense and loved the Gregorian and so on, still the teaching that those who are not baptized Catholic are going to hell somehow disturbed me. I even really lost some sleep based on that narrow understanding that I was taught before the Vatican. What a God that must be, who can condemn all of those people, all of those children outside of the historical Catholic Church just because they happen to be born outside of it. And I could not reconcile myself with the image of such a God. And so I was still struggling with the idea of, does God even exist, and so on. And so in any case, when the Vatican Council came with that the proclamation of Nostra Aetate, somehow that liberated me to realize that, yes, God is found everywhere, where there is good and truth and holiness. And so, to make a long story short, as a Jesuit, I was sent to Japan after 6 or 7 years in the Philippines. I was sent to Japan to continue my studies there and to serve in the Japanese society as a Jesuit. And there I was able to encounter Zen Buddhism as a practice, not so much as a doctrine, but that's another story which I won't bore you with, but I found myself practicing Zen as a Jesuit in Japan. And if I had not been encouraged and empowered and broadened by this vision of Nostra Aetate, I would not have been able to enter into Zen practice myself. Because now with that understanding and with that conviction that wherever there's good and truth and holiness, goodness and truth and holiness, there God is. Somehow when I was led into Zen practice and found that very, very powerful as a way of really opening my heart and experiencing a divine presence, a loving presence right here and right now in and through Zen practice, I was confident that this is where God wants me to be. So I explored Zen Buddhism and also Buddhism as an academic study. I went to graduate school and did my doctoral studies in Buddhist philosophy and so on. I did so with the confidence that I was not contradicting anything of my own Catholic faith. And in fact, the other way around, I hope I am able to enrich my own Catholic understanding, and I hope that my own studies will enrich the understanding of my fellow Catholics about where God is in Buddhism, in people who are practicing earnestly in their own tradition. And so with that, also looking at Judaism, where we are also indebted to the tradition that enables Christians to be what we are, and also to Islam, because God is also a continuing God who guides us into different twists and turns of our history, and we can learn about God from the different ways that God has been with us throughout history. So with that, what you would call, again, excuse me for this academic term, with that heuristic principle. Heuristic comes from the Greek word heurisko, to discover. Remember Archimedes when he was in the bathtub and there was something that floated up and he said, "Eureka!" He was not talking about a vacuum cleaner, but that's the perfect form of I've discovered it, I've got it. And so in that sense, a heuristic principle is a principle that allows us to discover new things. And it is the Nostra Aetate that is a heuristic principle for all of us to discover that God can be found in each of us, no matter what the external, cultural, historical differences we may have. We may celebrate one another precisely because there is that seed of the goodness and truth and holiness that God is in all of us, and we need one another precisely to be fully ourselves. There's much more I can say, but for me, to be Catholic means not only to be open, but to want to learn from my Jewish brothers and sisters, from my Muslim Jewish sisters and brothers, from my Buddhist friends and partners in the practice, and from my Hindu colleagues and also fellow seekers, and from everyone, even those who deny God because they see all sorts of contradictions in the way people talk about God, and I myself am tempted to be on their side because of the way God is presented in so many ways that are like an idol, like a grandfather in the sky, and so on. Well, we know all about that. But to see one another as someone from whom we can learn, and so we are always able to open up our hearts and open up to one another. And when we meet someone for the first time, we know that this is someone I can learn from, and so I'd like to keep my ears and heart open in that kind of learning. And for me, that's what Catholic is all about. Thank you.
So we have about 15 minutes or so for a conversation. And I think I'll probably start it off and then we'll kind of turn it over to y'all. You know, it's funny well, I don't know if it's funny, but just a couple of days ago, I was talking to one of my colleagues from the theology department, and we were just talking about interreligious dialogue and that it's hard to get people to do it. And I said to her, I said, I wonder if it's because just, you know, in 1965, people were religious. And you know, people there, it felt like there was a lot at stake, right? So they had things to talk about because, you know, it seemed like there were giant differences between a Catholic and a Presbyterian, and certainly between a Catholic and a Buddhist or a Catholic and a Muslim. But now the culture has shifted so much than where most people would describe themselves as spiritual but not religious, where there doesn't seem to be anything to talk about. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, we do know you're right about that. I mean, it's been studied that what I don't know, Dr. O'Keefe, is whether the younger generation is are spiritual seekers. We do know that they define themselves as secular. You know, that's a very that's the growing experience in America, and so you're right. But that's why I feel a meeting place might be in the academic world. That's an idea that I offer. In other words, if you enter these topics through the study of a text or of a document or of a historical context, and you do it when you're seeking for truth or empirically, you're not delivering a theological message. That might be a place where the people who are seeing themselves outside of the religious community might be able to get a foothold, might be able to enter. That's an idea that I've had. I find in the Jewish community, and we all, everybody, you have your own context. In the Jewish community, I find that is a place where you can talk to people who will tell you, Rabbi, I'm not religious. I don't do any. I'm not observant. So don't start talking to me about. Well, but if you open up a text and you approach it as a teacher would, I find that's an opening. I don't know if it's true in other communities, but.
I mean, I can just add to that. Most of the Muslim community is either first or second generation immigrants. So my parents and that generation, and probably to a lesser degree my generation, our main focus was making sure our kids were religious and understood Islam. But honestly speaking, it's when my kids entered the non-Muslim spaces, like the high school that they attended, and learned about other religions, especially because they have to take religion classes. Not only did they understand their religion more, but they also understood other religions more, both the similarities and differences. And if that can happen, in, like he said, in the academic realms, there's got to be a way to expand upon that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. From my own experience of being with a Zen community in Dallas, Texas for more than 30 years, there were a good number of people, young and old, young meaning in their 20s or 30s, old meaning 50, 60, 70 or so, who would come and say, I'm a spiritual seeker. I was born and raised Catholic or Protestant or Jewish or Muslim. We have Baha'i also. But somehow I have not been practicing in my traditional religious community, but I'm still seeking something. So that leads them to Buddhist meditation. So somehow I found that meditation, Zen meditation in particular, which I also learned from Japan, is a place of practice that can really touch us across our religious concepts and doctrines and enable us to open our hearts in silence and encounter the holy. So my hope is that, or rather, let me add another point. And in experiencing the holy in that form, I have heard from some individuals, or more than some individuals, who now tell me that I am now looking back at my own religious tradition and see that there's a lot of treasure there that I have neglected. And now that I'm able to access something through this silence, I can appreciate what I have learned from my own tradition in a new way. So somehow, spiritual practice seems to be a key for us to find a place of shared experience that we can dialogue with. And then, from that standpoint, we can discuss our differences in our doctrinal or religious standpoints. So somehow, just being in silence together can be something unitive and can strike at deeper chords of our being. And then we can talk and see where we can find our places of difference and our places of commonality.
Anybody from the group from the audience have a question?
have a mic. Any questions here?
Thank you. And thank you for coming, all of you, for coming here this evening. It's been very interesting. I've got a question for Dr. Zola. In terms of Nostra Aetate and the whole idea of Jewish-Christian dialogue, is that shared as well with other branches of Judaism outside of the Reform?
That's a great question. I think that, the more you move towards orthodoxy or the most traditional expressions of Judaism, the less interested you are in the outer world. You're interested in your community and in your tight-knit bond, and if you go to the extremes in that community, they shun even television, radio, computer. I'm talking about the very fringes. So yes, you're right. It's mostly what we would call the liberal Jewish community. But let me remind you that in the United States of America, 80% of the American Jewish community is liberal. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, is unique. That you can name any country in the world, and liberal Judaism is the minority, except the United States of America. So yes, you're right.
Unbelievably, I actually have something to say about this question. No, I was. No, but I really don't know a lot. But last year I was at a conference, and there was a representative from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops there who is in charge of the U.S. bishops' ecumenical and interreligious dialogues, and there is an official Orthodox Jewish Catholic dialogue that I volunteered to have it at Xavier because she was looking for places, but she never got back to me, so maybe I should reach out to her and see if we could make that happen.
I don't doubt that, but again, I always tell Christians, I think Christians often feel that they have the corner on the market in terms of diverse approaches, right? So that you have a gazillion denominations. Well, I'm here to tell you we may be much smaller than the Christian community, but you guys are pikers compared to Jews, because every Jew is a church unto him or herself, right? Even within Orthodoxy, this is my point, even within Orthodoxy, you're talking about a rainbow. So I'm going to take a gander that, and especially since it's a woman you're talking about, that it's more on the liberal side of Orthodoxy, but that's good. I'm glad to hear it. But the more you move towards people who, for example, are just consumed with their ritual and how to fulfill what in Hebrew is called the mitzvot, or the commandments, the more rigid you are and the more punctilious is a better word, the less interested those people will be in the outer world. But don't feel bad, they're not that interested in me either. So, okay.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Students? John,
Well, we said we'd go to 8:15, so I'll ask one more question. What do you think happened in 1965 that caused this giant ship to turn 180 degrees? Because it really is. We've said this a number of times tonight, especially for the benefit of the younger generation. This really was shocking. My teacher, one of my teachers of blessed memory, John O'Malley, S.J., he said that when Vatican II was announced, most of the cardinals were speechless because they couldn't believe this was going to happen. But there was this sort of courage and boldness that characterizes the church in 1965 that I think is easy to forget. And so maybe respond to that as a kind of closing comment.
We'll let others start.
I was 18 years old in 1965, so you can calculate the year I was born. But again, somehow at that time, it needed to happen. Otherwise, I believe that the Catholic Church would have just closed in on itself and just become a relic of the past. So somehow there were, I would say, bursts of the Spirit, if I may use that language, that were happening throughout the world. And so it was not just the cardinals in the Vatican, but since this involved bishops from all over the world, and the bishops brought their experience of being with their people, and it was their experience with the people that somehow enabled them to be able to articulate that in the council. Somehow, I felt that the time was ripe for that to happen. And unfortunately, though, after that, there were also backlashes from traditional-born Catholics who thought, oh, this is going too much. This is no longer Catholic, because their understanding of Catholic was based on those structures that we were taught from before the Vatican. And so, as we all know, there are also backlashes even now for so-called traditionalists. And so if we look at what being Catholic means from the word katholos, out of the whole, we are part of the whole, and each of us needs one another to fulfill that whole, that W-H-O-L-E. And so in that sense, if we take a Catholic with a capital R-C, Roman Catholic, there is a tradition that's based on medieval worship and medieval culture and so on. And people somehow tend to be drawn to that, as I was in my youth, but somehow that's a certain form that can be a block to the Spirit bursting out from all sides, destroying the old wineskins and bringing us to the need for a new one. And so that's where we are now, I believe, that we need that kind of new wineskin, and we haven't formed it yet. So I hope that we will be guided into that which everyone can participate as a full member. Not you are only a part-time member, or you are only partially, you only have a partial truth and so on. We are all bearers of the truth in our own ways, and we need one another. So that's what I hope our next phase of the world history can be.
So I don't know. I would love to hear from a historian, theologian, others, what the catalyst was for that. I don't know.
Well, you know, I've already said that if I were making this case in a historical, you know, I would place a great deal of importance on the calamitous event of World War II. And, you know, I could go on, but I won't, but I could document that, why I make that case. I also mentioned in my comments that I don't think we, you know, we should minimize the change in the leadership of the church, which was Pope John the 23rd. I remember him even as a young boy, and his whole disposition, just, he was, as a Jewish boy in America, and I'd see him on TV, he struck me as a rotund, jolly, happy person, whereas the elderly Pius was as stern as could be just in his look. So now, that's just a child's perspective, but the point I'm making here is that he was, you know, the ancient rabbis say, toho kavaro, which loosely translates in English as his outer was a reflection of his inner. and his policies, he was the initiator of this. I also want to point out what I didn't mention, because at least one new thing, is don't forget that in America, this was a period of liberation, right? This is the period of Dr. King. And again, World War II comes into play here because the African American goes and fights for America as supposedly as defeating fascism and dictators, then comes back to the United States, and what happens? So people of color are being liberated. It's a period of liberation, and so if you study the role the American church plays in this, the American church lobbies for this. The opposition is from many other places. And the last thing I'll say with regard to this, which is very interesting, is many of you know about the famous rabbi who marched with Dr. King.
Yes.
That's Abraham Joshua Heschel, who, by the way, was saved from the ovens of Hitler by the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, and he taught here in Cincinnati for 5 years before he went to New York. I also have to say, just as because Heschel was not the only rabbi, but he has become the paradigmatic rabbi who was with Dr. King because he sort of looked like a prophet, right, the way he carried himself. Now, you may not know that when Pope John the 23rd initiates in the early 60s this process, he begins to work in America through the advice of the bishops and the structure of the church. He works with the American Jewish Committee, an organization. And in the American Jewish Committee, the head of interreligious affairs in the late 50s and early 60s was a man named Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum. Mark Tannenbaum studied to be a rabbi at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and his beau ideal was Abraham Joshua Heschel. So when Tannenbaum becomes the representative of the American Jewish Committee to the process that will evolve, Tannenbaum, meets Cardinal B. Cardinal B is one of the shapers of the actual text. And he says, oh, you need to meet my teacher. And so B and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel become enamored with one another. And they become trusted scholars. And if you think I'm exaggerating, you should, of course, think that, because I'm given to exaggeration. But go on to your Google tonight and Google the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, and then Google the Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum papers, which have all been digitized. You can see them all right here from your computer, wherever you are, or from your phone, and go through the collection and go to the part about Nostra Aetate and about the council, and you'll see an amazing array of, I brought one just in case. I printed this off. You don't have to print it off. You can read it right on your screen. But this is a November 22nd, 1963 letter from Abraham Joshua Heschel to Cardinal B. And in there, he has read a penultimate version of the statement. And Rabbi Heschel is very politely and very respectfully offering two key suggestions that he thinks will sully the document because it doesn't give full expression to what Rabbi Heschel hopes will be the attitude of the church towards the Jew. And so they're dealing with Latin in this, the Latin wording, and obviously Heschel was capable in Latin as well as Hebrew. So if you are interested, go. But there's my three answers: the Holocaust, the arrival of the Pope, the new Pope, and finally the pressure of the American Church, which was advocating this, and that's out of the context of the American spirit of liberation, which was prevalent at that time.
Okay. Thank you. I think we'll call it there. And please join me in thanking our panelists. And also thanks to Martin for doing the heavy lifting, organizing all of these events, and thanks to all of you for coming. Also, if you have any interest in Heschel, there's a really wonderful documentary available on his life. Truly remarkable person. Okay, thank you.
It's worth learning because, as you obviously studied this, it's correct.